We're what's somewhat prosaically called a startup. Full Profile was formed in October last year by Bob McKay, Ben Reid and myself. I guess we have, across that founding group, around about 60, 70 years of agribusiness expertise. I was originally, many moons ago, a lawyer and worked at the Australian Wheat Board in the late 90s before moving into a series of management positions, and that was really what started my love affair with agriculture and agribusiness. So Full Profile was formed to look at deep, systemic and entrenched problems in the agricultural industry, both in Australia and overseas, and see if we could solve those with technology. And a particular technology that we're working with is blockchain. So we are looking at putting the agricultural supply chain on a blockchain or a distributed ledger.
The reason that we're asking you to come along in particular is because of the new way that you're working, and we wanted to explore whether the provision of legal services via new law models is assisting startups and small businesses like yourself to have access to legal assistance that you wouldn't otherwise be able to have.
Yeah, I guess as a new business, you're very cost conscious, but I think that probably goes across the board these days. So that's probably a common theme that you've heard from both small and large business, as well as sole proprietors. I think even a better way of putting it is to be value conscious. So it's about knowing how to specify the legal services that you're after, to be very objective oriented with your legal providers, and knowing how to access legal services that are appropriate to your stage of growth and to the solution that you're after, the problem that you're trying to solve. And I don't think those things are easy. I don't think they come naturally to everybody. So I think there's a lot of mistakes that seem quite expensive that probably reflect poorly on the legal profession or legal services in some ways, but they're kind of systemic problems about I don't know what I don't know, so I don't know what to ask for, and therefore I haven't actually really got what I wanted, but I had to pay for it anyway. So I think there's some of the early stage issues that startups face. Some of the ways that I've seen law firms looking to address those is we participate with Alan's Accelerator. I don't know if you've heard about that problem, that particular project, which is looking at addressing these problems with startups by providing access, a sort of a democratized access to typical documentation, as well as some form of advisory work that is suitable for an early stage business, particularly tech-oriented businesses. So typically that program means that you have some self-access to these documents. But I guess what I find is that the problems that we're dealing with, particularly at a high-end tech business, are often quite difficult, thorny issues, and they're not typically cannot typically be solved by standard documentation or standard advice work or by reading through legal newsletters. Often they need to be thrashed out, they need to be brainstormed, they need to be problem solved in ways that perhaps are quite expensive, typically when you're looking at time and materials cost. So I think that's a problem that we face in particular, and we've had to be very upfront with our legal providers in talking through how can we best access what we need, but at a cost point that is affordable for us. We also use LawPath, which is an online legal provider, and we also have access to the community, so the broader community, where these days lawyers have been much more active, and I think this is awesome, in terms of meetups, off-site community gatherings around technology points such as blockchain or the smart contracts, for example, that have been really topical. And that's meant we've been able to have offline discussion about thorny issues and explore ideas which help then form the traditional way of providing instructions to a lawyer of this is what I'm after, could you please provide it?
So is one of the solutions to ensuring that your problems are correctly identified, problems that perhaps you don't know you might have?
That's right.
Is that where you would use a traditional kind of law firm more than?
Yes. So I think where we are in that we don't know what we don't know quadrant, we can't efficiently access assistance in that area
Yeah.
in an online capacity, because we can't detail what we're after, and it requires a thought process that needs to go through that just isn't easily accessed online or in a kind of a cheaper format. So, you know, that's where I've found that building relationships is actually the really important thing. So it's finding a law firm that or a legal provider, it could be just a lawyer, who really can give time. I guess the other thing too is, this is probably another common theme, most people these days are not prepared to pay to school up a lawyer. They expect the lawyer to come in fully formed on the problem and the industry. And that's the same with most consulting services. You know, you're not prepared to pay for the schooling up period. So the way I've tackled that is to be very upfront and say, well, I'm not going to pay to educate you as to the grains industry or to the livestock industry or to what blockchain is. You know, I expect that. I'm happy to spend some time doing that, but I expect that to be done in a way that, you know, is not on a time and materials basis.
So the legal profession, the legislation that regulates the legal profession distinguishes between, I guess, legal information and legal advice. And what one of the things that you said that I found really interesting was that process of having meetups and essentially getting bits and pieces of information that would be in that legal information category as distinct from the legal advice category, and that can inform the decisions that you make, which are that may have a legal dimension.
Yeah.
Do you see that as basically getting you pretty close to where you would get to anyway if you got legal advice, or do you feel like there's something a bit ersatz about that? In other words, that you're making a significant compromise by going down that road as distinct from getting formal and more expensive, therefore, legal advice.
Yeah, thanks, Edward. I don't feel I'm making a compromise. You know, I feel it's an investment. So in basically spending time and being able to talk about thorny issues in a more relaxed or casual environment, I actually feel like I'm exploring that issue with sufficient clarity to get to a point where I can specify what I'm after. You know, I think the other thing, you know, in terms of the provision of legal services these days is that it's got to a point where when you're getting discounted services, which is what often startups are getting in some form, it's about balancing the equation for the law firm as well. So what do I provide back to the law firm that balances that equation? And some of the things that I do is, you know, provide testimonials or be in a video or attend a client function and speak on blockchain. So bring my technical expertise or commercial expertise to the legal context that delivers a value proposition for the law firm that can kind of come into the overall relationship when they're looking at how they provide legal services and the cost of that provision to a startup like us. So I think we need to provide think really broadly now about what that relationship is and where that relationship is conducted, because I don't think it's just conducted in a law firm, in a meeting room, you know, either at the client's office or at the law firm.
So are you part of that schooling up pre-going to a legal advice, but you are a lawyer?
Yeah, so I don't really think of myself as a lawyer anymore because I haven't held a practicing certificate for over 15 years. But yes, that's right.
So you're capable of doing that schooling up work. But if you had other non-lawyers in your group trying to take this information, sometimes it's difficult to identify what the problems are or could be without having legal knowledge.
Yeah, and the problems are not necessarily legal problems. They can be commercial problems with a legal bent. So it's about trying to think about how to describe that problem and to look at it from a series of different perspectives, but to do that in a way that is not so time consumptive that it becomes arduous for both the client and the lawyer. And I think that's quite difficult, but that's where the meetups and these kind of out of school or extracurricular activities I think are quite helpful.
And then you charge for your service and then pass it on to the next level, do you?
Well,
just trying to see where the cost is.
Yeah, so it's a give back, right? It's a pay forward you know, approach, and it's about building community, and lawyers are latecomers to the community, I think, in terms of business and tech. But I think that's where there's a lot of opportunity for value creation at some point.
And are you finding that you're using limited scope retainers, so engaging law firms on specific items, different lawyers for different jobs in different aspects of a project that you might be?
So once again, it goes to this schooling up idea. We just can't school up 3 or 4 or 5 law firms. We have to be practical around that. So you end up schooling up, perhaps 1 or 2 law firms that have overall the expertise that you're looking to access, or the reputational gravitas. If it depends, if it was a litigation matter, for example, you might be looking for a particular name to be associated with. I think that still happens. So we have to be fairly circumspect from that perspective. We can't be too distributed with our time, and that goes then also for the legal group. One of my pet bugs is lawyers turning up as lawyers when I just came for a meeting with a lawyer. We don't need 3 or 4 people in a room to solve that particular problem. We often only need one. And I'm very upfront now about talking about who's bearing the cost of this. If there's 2 or 3 people here who are here to be schooled up and to watch and learn, absolutely fine. Just don't expect to see that on an invoice.
Fair enough.
I think it has to happen, right? People need to participate, but the client can't bear the cost of that.
Yeah, well, it'd be good if lawyers were like Venus, born fully formed.
Yeah, they don't come out fully formed,
yeah.
And the scars are different scars as a lawyer to what they are as an entrepreneur, to what they are as a business owner.
Sure.
I think as business people, we appreciate that, but the cost has become very high for those scars. So I guess what law firms are looking to do is to productize some of what they do, and then to differentiate outside of the product space, and then charge at a higher rate for the differentiated product.
So are there any trends that you can see emerging for you as a purchaser of legal services?
The trend has become quite just in time, I think. So there's not long legal engagements so much anymore. That's where I think the relationship perhaps has replaced the engagement. So quite often I will have discussions on Twitter with lawyers that I have a services relationship with, or we'll be following each other and staying in touch via, social media. And then that's a way of keeping in touch, knowing what each is going on in each business, what's important. And then we get to a point where there's a service that's required and that's provided on a just-in-time basis. So I think that's an ongoing trend, combined with this staying in touch via social media. That's perhaps I'm seeing more lawyers have opinions that are not house opinions, and so they're able to disclaim their opinions on social media from the house opinion. I find that really interesting and really valuable, and that helps me know where to go to choose a lawyer that is inclined to my way of thinking, or I think would be a really good a great relationship to be involved with. The other trend from my perspective is, because we're investing a lot of time, is therefore sustainability in the relationship. So am I investing in someone who is going to be around for a while, and in a law firm that's going to be around for a while? And that's perhaps the challenge of some of the online providers that they may face. I haven't, it's been fine so far, but maybe that'll be a challenge in the future.
Is there a tension at all with that relationship that you described, which the value of which is clear and probably has always been really important, and that I guess professional distance and the kind of disinterested nature, in the appropriate meaning of the term, that a lawyer has traditionally that position that the lawyer has traditionally held.
Yes.
Do you see a tension there, or do you?
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a balance to be struck. So,
Right.
there's social media and then there's real social relationships, I
Yeah.
guess, isn't there? And I think I'd like to think that I can strike that balance, but I think it is careful to be monitoring, we've got to be careful to monitor that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do think.
So, I mean, can you
How
see
do I-
how the problem might play out and how you might resolve it, or is it a bit too early to sort of say
Yeah,
that?
it hasn't, a bit too early in my personal context. From a business perspective, I think it's always good to know and to state up front with your legal providers that this is the context that I'm operating in at the moment. And then, when we're at a meetup, now it's a community context, so we're discussing, ideas or new problems that are of interest outside of my business. And then I guess if it's a social occasion, to make sure that actually people are aware that this is now a social occasion as well. Personally, I really like the lawyers I deal with. It would be great to have social time together, but I actually don't think it's a really good idea.
Your website calls you a lawyer, though. Do you think people might think, oh, this is just a part of the cheaper process if I go to you and then you go somewhere else?
In what context, Jane?
Well, they're coming to you for advice, are they? Or?
Oh, no one comes to me for advice, no, because I don't provide advice, no. If someone came and said, oh, I'm coming to you for legal advice, I would put them to a lawyer because I don't claim to provide. I mean, yes, I have a law degree, and I think, I'm a former lawyer. I think I'm often described that way. But the advice that I provide is commercial advice. It may be advisory in the context of a startup and the ecosystem, or in the context of a blockchain use case or something like that, but not in the context of the law itself.